Hello, my name is Latoya Grant. I'm co-chair tonight. I'm going to talk to you about the start of a project. It's led by deaf and disabled people who have developed a shadow report for the next round of reports, and that's for the UNCRDP. So that's the UN Disabled People's Committee. It's the shadow report. And it's our observations, perspectives of people who are deaf and or disabled. Our organisation, it's about how we think the government should be fully responsible and compliant under the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Disabled People, and how so far we believe they've progressed. It's for deaf and disabled people in the UK. From October 2021 until March 2022, there'll be a full range of different activities in different places around the country for deaf and disabled people and by deaf and disabled people and their allies to be involved with the shadow report process. The working lead and partnership for deaf and disabled organisations include the lead and strategy of the General Inclusion Strategy, and this is for all the regions of England. And so this will include all of the future issues. And this is the DDPO forum for Disability Rights UK, Our Voices, Disabled People Against Cuts, with input from York's University's Centre for Applied Human Rights and the London School of Economics. This is a UK-wide project, and this is a partnership with deaf and disabled people's organisations to create our own shadow report.
Thank you, Latoya. It's brilliant to be here with you all this evening. My name is Martha Folds and I'll be co-chairing alongside Latoya. I'll start by running through some housekeeping. We'll be hearing from several speakers about their work and the UN Convention, with an access break halfway through, and we're due to finish at 7:30 p.m. We're live on Inclusion London's Twitter, YouTube and Facebook pages with BSL and captions. The live link for anyone requiring access to the speech-to-text transcript should be in the comments. Please do join in the conversation on social media using the hashtag UNCRDP2021. At the end of the event, Svetlana Kutova will give more information about how people can get involved in contributing their views and sending in evidence for what should go into the shadow report. And now to our speakers. We'll be asking 2 questions per speaker, and they'll each have around 10 minutes in total. First of all, Tara Flood. Tara is a veterans disabled people's rights campaigner. She went to New York in 2006 as a representative of the inclusive education movement to take part in the work that went on between the international deaf and disabled people's organisations to agree the wording of the convention. Tara, are you with us?
I am. I'm just starting my video.
Brilliant, great
hi,
to see
everyone.
you. So the first question for you, why was the convention necessary?
Okay, can I just say, I'm not sure I love being described as a veteran. I've been around for a long time. I'm not sure I'm a veteran just yet. I don't know how that defines me. But anyway, why was the convention necessary? Well, I guess the very short answer is because until the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, we were essentially an invisible community. But I thought, and we've also waited a very long time, more than 40 years. So I thought what I would do to start answering the question is I'd just give us a little sort of stroll through the history of what we've had to endure before we finally got our own convention. So if those of you who were born before 1981, you might remember that 1981 was the International Year of the Disabled, their description, not ours. And what was interesting about it is that it was a United Nations attempt to try to quieten down the growing call for a convention dedicated to disabled people. So instead, they offered a decade of disabled persons, and that was from 1983 to 1992. But that again, as the International Year, was dominated by the big disability charities and NGOs around the world. There was very little action led by disabled people because it was so much controlled by disability charities, apart from that moment where Disabled People's International was formed. So after the decade, there was a world programme of action that came out in 1982. I think the short version of that is World Programme of Inaction. That was followed by the Standard Rules on the Equalisation of Opportunities for Persons with Disabilities. That was published in 1994. Despite decades of campaigning and activism, we had to wait another 12 years for the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which was agreed, as we all know, in 2006. And it could be said that good things happen to those that wait, but really, that is a very long time to have to have waited. And what's interesting, the convention came 14 years after the General Secretary of the UN had declared the situation of disabled people around the world as a silent emergency. He just didn't think that there was any rush in doing anything about it. So yeah, the convention was really necessary and continues to be necessary. And so why? So the United Nations on the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities is an international treaty which for the first time identifies the rights of disabled people and deaf people, as well as the obligations on governments to promote, protect and ensure those rights. The convention has 50 articles and it covers most aspects of our lives, including, let's say, the right to life, the right to an education that's inclusive, the right to independent living, employment, an adequate standard of living, access to justice, freedom of movement and expression, as well as the right for DDPOs to be involved in the monitoring of the implementation of the convention. Don't worry, I'm not going to go through all 50. The convention is necessary because it shifts the narrative about who we are as deaf and disabled people, shifting away from that age-old traditional approach of us being seen as objects of charity, medical treatment and social protection, and much more towards seeing us as human beings with rights who are capable of claiming those rights and making decisions about our lives, as well as being active members of society. The convention is intended as a human rights instrument with explicit social and development dimensions. It has a broad definition of disability, loosely based on the social model of disability, not as close as we would like to have been, but hey, and it reaffirms that all deaf and disabled people must enjoy all human rights and fundamental freedoms. It also clarifies and quantifies how all categories of rights apply to deaf and disabled people, and identifies the different areas where changes have to be made so that deaf and disabled people can effectively exercise our rights, and areas where our rights have been violated and where protections of rights must be enforced. We'll hear more about that later, I'm sure. The CRPD is also important because it's pioneering. It's the first human rights convention of the 21st century to address disability rights on a worldwide scale. It was also the first convention of the 21st century that actively involved civil society in its creation. So many of the governments that were represented in New York during the convention discussions included disabled people in their delegations. And there were a few of us, I was there, who were able to get to New York during those early discussions. And I think we were really effective in influencing both the definition. No one was talking about a social model of definition before we started to push for it, but also some of the key articles within the convention, Article 19, 24, 33, etc. And then lastly on this question, you'll be pleased to know, Martha, the convention I think is necessary because it creates a legally binding international instrument that exists to guarantee those states and governments who ratify the treaty, who ratify the convention, that they have to promote and protect disabled and deaf people's rights. So when a government ratifies a UN human rights treaty, it agrees to be bound by the obligations within that treaty. And that includes agreeing, and I guess that's what today's about, it agrees to be monitored by its implementation of the convention by the Convention Committee. And that's crucial because that's the opportunity to tell the world what's going on and what the real situation is for disabled people.
That's a fantastic history. Thanks so much, Tara. The next question for you, what's the relationship between the UN Convention and activism?
Okay, these are such massive questions, they really are. Okay, so I think really the most important thing to remember about the UNCRPD is that it only exists because of 40 years of activism by deaf and disabled people around the world. That campaigning has been driven by our refusal to continue to be defined in international law by the category of and others, as is the case with, I think, almost all other human rights treaties before the UNCRPD. That's important, and that's because deaf and disabled people's activism. I think that othering, that invisibility left unchallenged for decades led to discrimination, marginalisation and systematic abuse of our rights for the last forever. So I talked before about the convention being the first human rights treaty to involve civil society, us, and that many governments represented the convention discussions included disabled people in those delegations. And it was the leading on from that, it was activism again here in the UK that guaranteed the UK to be one of the first countries to sign up to the convention. That was in June 2009. But I need to say that's not because the government at the time was some fantastic champion for our human rights. I think it was because disabled and deaf people at the time put a huge amount of pressure on the then Labour government to follow up their commitment by actions. And I think, weirdly, there was still quite a good relationship between DDPOs and the Office for Disability Issues at the time. Remember, this was a Labour government, and that feels, I have to say, I'm sure for all of us, a very long time ago. But I think when a state ratifies, when a government ratifies a treaty, it takes on legal obligations under international law. So as well as signing up to the CRPD, the UK government also signed up to the optional protocol, and you're going to hear more about that from other speakers. But that's essentially a complaints procedure that can be activated by civil society, again, by us. And I honestly think when governments, when states parties sign optional protocols, they honestly think that no one's actually going to pursue them, and how wrong they were when it came to the UK. The UK and the convention, I was thinking about this the other day. I think things feel so difficult at the moment that the UN Convention feels like a very long way from the discrimination and the marginalisation and the oppression disabled people and deaf people are feeling every single day. But we shouldn't forget that we've been able to use the convention here in the UK. There have been numerous legal cases taken by deaf and disabled people since the convention was ratified. We've been able to reference the convention as well as specific articles and the related general comments. Just general comments, I don't know if anyone's going to talk about general comments, but general comments are produced by the United Nations as a way of giving more information to governments and states parties for how they can implement particular articles. But in terms of the optional protocol, I don't think it's any surprise that it was down to deaf and disabled people's activism, again, led by DPAC, that triggered the optional protocol here in 2013, which led to the committee's inquiry. And as we know, it was an inquiry that found the UK government guilty of grave and systemic human rights abuses against disabled people. I think what's interesting, and it's shameful for a country as rich as the UK, but we were the first of all the signatories of the convention to be subjected to an optional protocol inquiry, despite the government that saying how fantastic the law is for disabled people and deaf people and how supportive that they are. But that shameful position, that shining a bright light on the UK government's absolutely appalling treatment of disabled people, came about again because of the power of activism. And in 2017, disability rights activists led the work to producing the first civil society report as part of the official scrutiny process. And it's also important to know that most of the disabled people in Geneva, deaf and disabled people in Geneva in 2017, giving evidence to the CRPD Committee were activists. But there's more work to be done. Of course there is. When the UK ratified the convention in 2009, it didn't make it part of our domestic law, and it shamefully again withdrew its ratification in relation to certain articles. They're called caveats, and they remain for Article 27 and Article 24, inclusive education. So the activism needs to continue. But I just want to remind us again that the convention wouldn't have happened without deaf and disabled people's activism, and full implementation of our rights will only happen with our activism now and into the future. So I'll stop there, Martha.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much, Tara. We're now going to hear from Gertrude Fefoame, who is a serving member of the UN Committee on Rights of Disabled People. She is chair of both the committee's working group on women and girls with disability and the committee's task force for developing a general comment about the right to work and employment, which comes under Article 27 of the Convention. She is also a global advocacy advisor on social inclusion for Sightsavers, president of the International Council for Education of People with Visual Impairment, and a board member of the Ghana Federation of Disability Organisations. Well, it's great to have you here, Gertrude. What led you to join the UN CRDP Committee, and what's it like being on the committee?
Sorry, I was muted. Thank you very much, Martha. Very interesting question. And I can also find it a very, very energizing at the same time, listening to Tara and following what Tara said, the journey has been long. So the journey has been long where I have been part before 1981. And 81, for instance, remarkable for me as that was the time when we wanted to strengthen the voices of grassroots women and establish the Ghana Blind Women's Group. Moved on into working around human rights issues, considering the standard rules on equalization opportunities. I remember the several encounters with Ben Lindquist, discussing, analyzing, and getting ourselves empowered. Moving on to where I was part of looking at children's voices. Then I was chairing the World Blind Union's Children's Committee. Moving on to where I was part of building capacity of organizations of persons with disabilities so that we can have the voice, we can advocate, we can do the activism the way we need it. So coming from a grassroots society and a woman going through the spectrum of the journey and also getting into the international arena where I did not know only about myself, but I knew or know about other disability categories and situations of other people in different countries, because as you said, I work with sight savers. So that also gave me another platform. So a member of a grassroots organization, woman coming from Africa, then getting the engagement over the years. Some achievements, but some disappointments as we move on the journey. Then sitting back and looking at where are we and where else can we add value? Then the issue of being a member of the CRPD committee came into fore. Because also my local organization, the Ghana Federation of Disability Organization, has been talking about this. And it got embraced also by sight savers and so many other partners, and with my state support and collaboration, it came to be. How has it been there? One of my campaign messages then was women voices on the committee. In 2016, I stood for election to be a member of the committee, including the UK-owned Diane Kingston. There were only 3 women and none of us were elected. This left the committee with only 1 woman out of 18. And being an activist of women's voices from so many years back, I couldn't look to see this continuing. So then looking at Africa at that time, women from Africa were not getting onto the committee. So the need was even more for women globally, for women in Africa, for grassroots voices that has interaction and intervention with global world and international fronts. The time was just right. To learn in there, to continue the advocacy and the activism, to bring the voices to the fore, and to bring back, because I still have the platforms of organizations of persons with disabilities and partners. As I am there now, the regular committee work continues. But demonstrating what it is to be a woman from the grassroots, 2019, as I joined, I got to be a co-chair of a country as a rapporteur. Some people would take a bit more time, but I knew the way to learn, it has to be the quickest way. As I'm speaking now, I am a member of the CRPD. CRC is the Convention on the Rights of the Child working group, so that we're looking at where we could strengthen the issues of the child with disability within the CRC work. I lead the task force and the committee on the general comments on work and employment. It is a matter for everybody, but it's a matter for women, and it is a matter from those of us from the developing countries, even the more. Being able to understand and bring our voices continue to be important.
Thank
Recently,
you.
I'm
very sorry, Gertrude.
well.
I'm going to have to move on to the next question.
Thank you.
That's really brilliant to hear. Thank you so much. If I move on to the next question, what advice would you give to deaf and disabled people's organisations in the UK as we start to prepare our next shadow report?
Thank you very much. As you know, and many of us might know, the CRPD Committee encourages participation in the reporting process, and this has been well illustrated by Tara, the only convention that really ensures this. So, in fact, Article 3 of the CRPD anticipates the involvement of the consultation of civil society, particularly organizations of persons with disabilities. So, it is critical that now that we're going to have a different form of the shadow report, because there has been a decision by the committee that 2014 onwards, any subsequent reports after the first one is not going to be full. So what UK is going to have is going to be responses of lists of issues. And it is critical that civil society organizations, particularly the deaf organization, is involved. We can build alliance with other organizations, but we can also submit a shadow report for the organization of the deaf. But I would recommend that what we put into the separate report, if we decide to do that, we should do well that it reflects if there is going to be a generic report too, so that it is even better strengthened. The consultation will need to be deepened, looking at the concluding observations of the previous one, gathering the information of how well or otherwise from sources like academia, justice, without justice institutions, media, count them. But it's also important that we are able to interview individuals with disability with a lived experience, because that is where it becomes most alive, so that we can bring our situation and issues into it. We need also to bring on board the impact of ongoing activities, programs, and disability-related issues from over the period. So for instance, UK led in the Global Disability Summit, made commitment we need to bring them into the summary as well. There has also been voluntary national reviews of the SDGs. They're important for us to look at that as well. There is also the COVID and COVID impact of COVID, the recovery, response and recovery programs. How has the state engaged with us and we with them? And that part is also critical. So what I am illustrating is we use the traditional method of gathering information, but we also look at ongoing issues and events, deepen the voices of persons with disabilities, build alliances as they may be necessary, get into other civil society organizations, bring what we've gathered from CRC, CRPD, universal reviews and all, and get us a succinct shadow report that speaks to the issue. It's best that it's submitted before the list of issues. The list of issues is the questions that the rapporteur will be developing to the UK government. When this information arrives with the committee before then, is best useful. But even that, we should also make sure that we participate in the government response and make sure that our voices are still there. Thank you very much.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Gertrude, for joining us. It's been brilliant to have you here. We are now going to hear from Catherinne.
Thank you.
We're now going to hear from Catherinne Pedreros, who has supported the CRPD Committee for 9 years and has worked with other UN committees as well, notably the Convention for the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, the Convention on the Rights of the Child, the Convention on the Protection of the Rights of All Migrant Workers and Members of their Families, and the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. Catherinne has also joined country visits with the Subcommittee on the Prevention of Torture and worked with the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights at the country level, where she started promoting the ratification of the CRDP in her country of origin and the recognition and participation of disabled people and their organisations in the mainstream human rights movement. Prior to joining the United Nations, Catherinne was working with the Constitutional Court of Colombia, the National Human Rights Institution, and civil society human rights organisations, where she gained her first professional experience as a human rights lawyer and promoted the process called London Cartagena Bogota, aimed at promoting international cooperation compatible with human rights in her country. What an amazing experience, set of experience there. Catherinne, are you with us?
Good evening, Martha. Yes, I'm here.
Brilliant, brilliant. So our first question is, what has changed as a direct result of the convention? But also, what would you say are its limitations? And you've got about 5 minutes for that.
Thank you so much, and really thank you to all of you for this invitation, for this opportunity to be this evening with organizations of deaf persons and other organizations of civil society in England. I think that I would like to share with you 7 points of what I think it has changed in the last years since the convention was adopted. And I think one of these, Tara already mentioned it, is that now there is a legal and policy framework at the international level. And this legal and international framework has been agreed by the majority of member states of the United Nations. So there is really a world agreement of 184 member states that have become states parties to the convention. And what does it mean? What has changed and what does it mean? That different countries with different legal, cultural systems, geographical regions have agreed to commit themselves to the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, the rights that the Convention enshrines, and the spirit of the Convention. So the second point for me is that now the situation, and this is also in connection what with Tara was explaining, that not anymore it is about the goodwill of a government or a program of a law government to work to make a reality the rights of persons with disabilities. So it is just that change from the charity model and charity approach to be an obligation. So it's not anymore subject to the goodwill of a public authority of any government, but there is a legally binding instrument that persons with disabilities can invoke. The third point, and I'm mindful about time, is that society now is more aware about discrimination of persons with disabilities. So this is not really that there is no more the saying of we don't know what is happening. Like society now, with the inception of the convention and with the work of the committee and the work of civil society, society has realized what are the problems, what is the type of marginalization and discrimination that persons with disabilities have been facing for a long time. The fourth thing is that experiences maybe is very similar. The experiences of marginalization of persons with disabilities do not concern to them only, but it is a societal issue and an obligation for society to address. 5, that responsibility belongs now to the government at the local level, municipal level, but also at the national level, at the federal level. So it's different layers of responsibility where persons with disabilities should be respected in their rights. 6, there is accountability. So media, like policymakers, they now are accountable about the language they use when speaking to persons with disabilities or about persons with disabilities. They are accountable about the decision-making processes concerning adoption of measures, policies, programs concerning the rights of persons with disabilities, also media. So now any remark about persons with disabilities should be in line with the convention, should be coherent and should respect the parameters that the convention has set up. And the 7th point and the last point is the periodicity of public international forums concerning the rights of persons with disabilities. As Tara mentioned before, there were different processes at the United Nations, but now with the committee and the committee members being working not only during the committee sessions, and Ms. Fefoame would agree with me, but also intensively during the intersessional periods or when they are not in Geneva holding their sessions. This is really a permanent international mechanism working on the rights of persons with disabilities. So I think these 7 ideas are for me like the positive change. And for me, what is missing is really the attitudinal barriers. I think that is the greatest challenge that the convention as a legal instrument cannot really deal with. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you so much. If we move on to the second question, similar to some of the questions we've had before, what advice would you give to deaf and disabled people's organisations in the UK as we start to prepare our next shadow report?
Thank you, Marta. And I would like to start just recalling what Ms. Fefoame mentioned about diversity and about being a woman from the global south for the first time in an international United Nations mechanism. And in that sense, I think the process of the CRPD alternative report is really an opportunity for organizations and the diversity of organizations of persons with disabilities to take part in an international process. So I would like encourage organizations of persons with disabilities now that they include the diversity of organizations, like organizations of women with disabilities, organizations of children and young persons with disabilities, but also organizations working on sectors and at different levels, especially grassroots organizations. I think one vital aspect of the first inquiry procedure of the committee that took part in relation to the State Party of the United Kingdom was precisely that the inquiry report was, the information provided to the committee was brought by grassroots organizations. And this really gave a lot of legitimacy and strength to the committee to move on this procedure. So my first point would be really to take into account and to ensure that all types of organizations and grassroots organizations are part of your process to consult and to develop the alternative report or reports. Also, organizations of persons with intellectual disabilities. In many state parties, persons with intellectual disabilities cannot join or cannot form their own organizations because they are denied legal capacity. And because of this fact of being under guardianship, they also cannot be part or cannot form their own organizations, or their organizations are not registered or recognized. But civil society would not have this legal problem, this legal obstacle, this legal barrier. So it would be an opportunity to encourage, to support, and to facilitate also engagement of organizations of persons with intellectual disabilities in this process, but also persons with disabilities who are in institutions, in different types of institutions, which the committee has received information they are really the most marginalized among the marginalized persons. Another suggestion from my side is that it is important to prioritize topics, because this is already the second and third periodic report. So the committee already had its first dialogue with the state party representatives. For the first time already listened from organizations of persons with disabilities about what was happening and what was like the situation in the state party. But now the committee needs to follow up also on priorities, on specific issues that really have not changed at all, or where the situation has become worse, or even like more violations can be documented. So it is important that as a civil society, you could highlight those aspects that for you as a civil society are more like relevant for the committee to address. Of course, the committee will analyze, will focus on like the whole convention, because its mandate involves the whole convention, but it also needs to have like a strategic approach to this review. So to really engage in questions which are like less general and more specific to the reality of England in this case, and the state party, the whole state party in 2022 or 2023 or 2024, or the year when the interactive dialogue takes place. But it is important if you could follow up like on the issues that were, of course, addressed by the committee in its first review, but also to bring your own analysis of what strategic and specific focus should have the committee for the second and third periodic reporting process. And also it is important to realize, and this is my advice, like to continue engaging at the national level, at the country level, with other stakeholders, with media, with also with other civil society, like human rights organizations, as you are already doing with Inclusion London, and also with independent monitoring frameworks, because while the committee can schedule the review of the UK, the adoption of a list of issues, it can take like years. Especially after the pandemic, the backlog of the committee has increased, and the reviews have been delayed. So it is important, and as part of the Secretariat right now, I'm in the obligation to let you know that the situation is really one in which the committee is taking several years before it can review the second and third report of state parties. And this is due to the fact that first the pandemic, which impeded the committee to hold sessions and to hold dialogues with the state parties, but also because of the limited time to hold meetings in Geneva and conduct state parties reviews in person. I'm not sure if I have more time available or if I should stop here, Mark. Thank you.
Thank you for your time. And if you wanted to carry on, was there anything you wanted to say? Was there anything extra you wanted to add?
Maybe just one last idea.
Okay, yep, that's fine.
So that in your report, written report, and also in the discussions with civil society, you could identify who is the responsible authority to respond to that situation. And if at the national level you have any mechanism that could address a specific situation, and if it's working or not. So when the committee receives the information and when the committee makes a recommendation, it's a recommendation that really goes beyond to what it already exists. So it's not saying like the Ministry of Education needs to ensure inclusive education. Yes, we all know that, and they all know that. But what is where is the problem? What is that decision that the duty bearer, the Ministry of Education, just to put an example, is not complying with, that the committee needs to reinforce in its dialogue and in its message, its written concluding observations to the state party. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you. Okay, I wanted to say thank you to all our speakers. And now we're going to have a 10-minute comfort break. When we come back in the second half, we're going to be hearing from Linda Burnett. And she's going to be talking about the special inquiry. We're also going to hear from Svetlana Kortova and find out how people can get involved in the next shadow report. So 10-minute break, and we'll be back around 7. Thank you.
Okay, welcome back everyone. Great to be here once again. So we are now going to be hearing from Linda Burnup, who is the co-founder of Disabled People Against Cuts. Linda, together with co-founder Debbie Jolly and other members of the DPAC research team, triggered the committee's special investigation of the UK under the optional protocol, and that took place in 2015 with the findings published in November 2016. Hi Linda, great to see you.
Hi, hello Martha.
So our first question for you tonight is, can you briefly explain what the special inquiry was and how you triggered it?
Okay, well, it was quite a long time ago, so the memory's a bit hazy, but basically when the UK signed up to the UN Convention, they also signed up to the optional protocols, which not every country does. I suspect that when they did sign up to it, they never expected that the first country to be investigated would be the UK. But at that time, Debbie and I used to spend a lot of time sort of looking at various ways we thought we could embarrass the government, bring the government to account, try and stop the attacks against disabled people. And we thought, as no one else had ever used the optional protocol 6, I think it is, we would try that. And so we got in touch with the UN. And I think it was October 2013, Debbie and I, together with a solicitor who we dragged along to sort of vouch for us and say that we were serious people and we should be listened to, met with the Secretary of the Disability Committee secretly in London. And then Debbie, myself and our research team, Bob and Annie, put together a report, and the first report we did actually had over 40 violations of disabled people's rights, which was the report we sent off to the UN. And then I think the government had 6 months, but it took them longer to respond to that. Obviously they wrote back and sort of said, oh, we were totally wrong. Then we got to write another report, and then that got ping-ponged back and forwards. And then eventually the committee decided they were going to come to the UK to carry out an investigation. And it was, I think, really powerful. They were here for 2 weeks. They spoke to lots and lots of people, not just disabled people, but politicians and barristers and lords, and, you know, a whole range of people who all were saying the same thing. And I think they had over 3,000 pages of evidence when they finished the inquiry. And obviously, as Tara said, they found that disabled people's rights were being gravely and systematically violated, and that our rights actually in the UK were regressing rather than progressing. And I think it's important to say that when a state party signs up to the UN Convention, what they are basically saying they will do is to make sure that disabled people's rights are progressively improved, and that things won't go backwards and that things won't get worse. And unfortunately, I really don't think that in the last 11 years that has happened in the UK. I think one of the, I mean, the only thing was it was a really difficult sort of couple of years because I think the committee weren't quite sure how to deal with this optional protocol because it had never been used before, and everything had to be really secret, which I think for Debbie and I it was quite difficult because we actually wanted to tell people what we were doing, but we weren't able to. And yeah, I think that's all I've got to say, really.
That is fantastic. Thank you so much. I know I speak for many people when I say how important your work was, so thank you. Moving on to the second question now, what would you say is the relationship now between the inquiry that happened and the routine examination of the UK under the convention?
I think the inquiry sort of underpinned what the periodic review in 2017 looked at, and obviously there's that evidence that has gone into previous reports, and I think one of the things is that in lots of ways the inquiry hasn't actually ended, because the UK is, I think, the only country in the world, unless Hungary have to now do it as well, that has to make annual reports to the UN saying how far they've progressed with the recommendations that they've been given. And I think I did just have a look at the recommendations that were made from the inquiry and from the periodic review, because I couldn't think offhand what the government had put in place that was improving things, and I thought, well, there must be at least one thing that they've done that's improving things. But when I read through the reports, actually, no, I can't see anything that they've done that has improved things. And I think particularly with the pandemic, things have got a lot worse in a lot of areas, particularly in relation to independent living and right to life. So I think the main relationship is that, you know, the reports that already exist and which are built on and which the committee take into consideration when they're looking at what is happening in the UK now and in the future. And I think it's really interesting that Hungary have now used the optional protocol to complain about their government, and we were involved, and I believe it's on YouTube, in meeting with them and giving them advice on how to make that complaint. And I think that's all I've got to say, really. Nikki, I think you're muted still.
Sorry. Thank you, Linda. Thanks for being involved, and thank you for your time. Now I'm going to introduce Svetlana, who is Director of Campaigns for Justice in Inclusion London. And she started in Inclusion London in August 2016 as the manager of Campaigns for Justice for their project. And she herself is a disabled lawyer and has spent many years fighting for the rights of disabled people. She's worked with a variety of policies and has found the best way to work with disabled people and has been fighting for their rights both locally and on a national level too. Svetlana, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you, Latoya.
So, question to you. Can you hear the interpreter okay, Svetlana?
Yes, I can. Yes.
Okay, lovely. So I have a question for you. How can deaf and disabled people, organisations, what can they put in place and what should they do for the next shadow report?
Okay, thanks very much, Latoya. First, I will answer this question. I just wanted to add a little bit to what you said about this project at the beginning of this meeting. So we are really excited that we will be doing this work because we believe that disabled people and our organizations should be at the driving seat when it comes to monitoring the progress that our government has made in implementing UN Convention on Rights of Disabled People. We, as a movement, have done a lot to use convention to hold government to account, but of course we can't stop and we will continue. We this time want to make sure we reach out and hear from disabled people from different backgrounds with different experiences. And so we can give UN committee comprehensive and accurate information about what is happening. We will be focusing on England, but of course we will be working together with our partners in devolved nations to produce reports that will cover all the UK. So today we're launching our call for evidence, and the work that we'll be doing will have different strands to it. Firstly, we partnered with many organizations across England, many deaf and disabled people's organizations across England, and they will be holding events where they will talk about convention to make sure more disabled people understand the convention, what it is and how we can use it. And then they will discuss with their members the progress that was made since 2017. One way to get involved is to take part in those events. And we're sure our partners will put access arrangements in place to make sure as many people can participate as possible. Another way to get involved is to respond to our call for evidence. So we are asking disabled people, DPOs, and allies like disability charities, human rights and equality organizations, academics interested in this subject, to send us information which you think is relevant to how our government is doing to implement its obligations under UN Convention and to implement recommendations that UN Disability Committee issued in 2017, but also inquiry recommendations, which Linda was talking about just a few minutes ago. So it could be information just about specific article, or it could be about several articles. You choose what you send to us. You need to remember that we will publish all evidence that we receive, And we need to make sure information that we give to the committee is well evidenced. So when you send us information, please tell us where you got it from, what's the source. Of course, as we heard today from Gertrude and others, that committee is really interested to hear lived experiences of disabled people. So we also welcome just people telling us about their experiences. And you can do this by sending us an email. Our email is crdp@inclusionlondon.org.uk, or you can also send it to us on WhatsApp. So we have all this information on our website, which is www.inclusionlondon.org.uk/CRDP. So we will put all this information in comments, and everyone will be able to see it. So these are the ways to share your information with us. This call for evidence will be open until 22nd of November. And also, as a third part of this work, we will be doing some specific work to reach out to disabled people who we don't often hear from. And we again partnered with different organizations who represent those people to do this.
I have another question for you.
Yep.
What will you do with the information that's provided?
So we will, obviously, we really appreciate people taking time to send us information, and we know it's really important. Firstly, of course, we will read everything, we will analyze everything, and as I said, we will publish everything we get. And then we will analyze information that we receive, and we will try and come up with list of priorities based on information that we receive. Then we will also check in back with DPOs and disabled people whether we're on the right track, because we will launch a short survey at the end of November, just to make sure that we are getting priorities right. And then from that, we will use information that we receive to write a report. Of course, those who have done it know, and those who haven't will find out that our word limit is very limited. Our report can't be very long because UN committee has many countries to look at. So we will not include everything we get in the report, but we try and do best job to reflect priorities that matter to disabled people. So I think maybe it would be good if I repeat again our website where everyone can find information. So it's inclusionlondon.org.uk, then /UNCRDP. And then email where you can send information to is crdp@inclusionlondon.org.uk. And we said that if people wanted to send BSL videos via WhatsApp, they could also use the number, WhatsApp number, which is 07561 064 227. We really look forward to receiving information, and you will find list of events that will be held on our website.
Oh, I wanted to say thank you so much for your time. Thank you Svetlana, and thank you everyone for watching. And now I'm going to hand over to Martha. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Latoya, and to everyone that's contributed tonight. Another reminder to make sure that you check out the list of consultation events on the Inclusion London website. That link again is www.inclusionlondon.org.uk/UNCRDP. It's been brilliant to chair tonight and a real privilege. Thank you everyone for joining and have a good rest of your evening. Bye-bye.
Thank you.